You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library as Mr. Brett Newcomb prepares his headphones. He's back. It's not that we really need the headphones, but it does actually...
Keeps my head from exploding when I talk to you.
Yeah. Keeps my ears warm.
You have this capacity to just generate distress that becomes...
I do? Yeah. And if your head exploded, that would probably be a mess that I would not want to clean up.
If you could see what was in my head, yeah.
I've said that to my wife many times. She says, hey, what are you thinking about? I'm like, man, you don't want to be in my head. That's a scary place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I saw a thing on Facebook, that a cartoon and a meme, man and woman laying in bed at night, both awake, facing away from each other.
Yeah.
And she's thinking, I wonder if he's thinking about other women. And he's thinking, how will Gonzaga win the tournament?
Yeah. Well, and she's wondering, and I don't want this to be a social commentary, but she's wondering if he's thinking about other women, but she's not offering to be with him.
We don't know any more than that.
We don't know any more than that.
She's laying there next to him, they're together alone, which is not an uncommon circumstance.
It is not an uncommon circumstance. No, it is not. That is true. So I have struggled mightily in my career. I don't know if you feel this much connection to this specific subject because you spent more time before the internets than I did.
Oh, I'm older. Yeah.
A little bit.
I didn't have the option.
So while I grew up without the internets were around by the time I started practicing.
I had books, and I still have books.
Yeah. Well, and so in another version of our lives, we worked at a group practice, and in that group practice, we did a lot of collaboration with the parochial schools. Yeah. And a lot of what I did there in that group practice was presentations on how the schools could bring technology into the schools safely and effectively, and how parents could manage their children's technological lives in a way that would be beneficial and healthy for them. Back in the early days, we were talking about, things like keystroke loggers, where you could actually see the kinds of websites that your children visited and things like that. And I mean, that's like now out the window. I mean, the technology now has advanced to the point where I guess you could still have keystroke loggers, but I'm not sure how effective that they are anymore. But one of the things that was profoundly memorable for me was I walked into my son's room one night, and he was hiding a screen. So he had AOL, if you don't know what that is. He had AIM, which was AOL Instant Messenger. Right. And so AOL was a service at the time, the biggest internet service on the planet, and they had started an internet messaging service, an instant messaging service, even before that was a thing on texting for phones.
Right.
And I walked in, and he was doing his homework, but he was also going back and forth between doing his homework and looking at this.
So he had figured it out and set up a hotkey, so if somebody came in the room, he could hit the key and it would blank the screen.
Yeah. But I saw it, and so I had introduced this idea, but I had never really had an extensive conversation. So I said, okay, we're going to have an extensive conversation. And I said, I need to know that all of the people that you are interacting with are actually legitimate people and that you know them. And he said, well, I know everybody on my AIM. And so we pulled it up. And I mean, at the time, I think he had 104 connections, right? Which compared to today is minuscule. right? I mean, you'd be embarrassed to say you had 104 connections today. But I said, okay, I need you to justify to me that all 104 of these people are real people. Where do they live? What classes do you share with them? And he could only do that with a handful.
This girl's name is Candy Does It in Dallas.
Yeah.
Who is she?
Yeah, yeah.
How do you know her?
She's in my 5th hour calculus class. Yeah, right. Uh-huh. And so I had a rule when my kids were growing up that they couldn't communicate with anybody that they couldn't verify the identity of. I don't even know if you could do that today. But what I do know is that as the internet becomes more ubiquitous, as communication goes more online, I'm very, very concerned with what we are doing to ourselves. Specifically, for me, the concern is in the area of the lack of skills for reading nonverbal human behavior.
So there's a term called mediated communications. Mediated communications use some type of technology as a go-between or an interface. So it can be your phone, it can be your computer, it can be a teletype or a typewriter or something, so that you are not face-to-face reading nonverbals as you exchange communications. Cooper and Morabian, two social scientists who studied all this in the early years, used to talk about nonverbal communications that were not mediated. So person to person, looking at you, reading all the different messages that are coming from you. You say something orally and I hear it. Those words that I hear compose about 7% of the message. The rest of the message comes from your nonverbals, your tone, your facial expression, your volume, your rhythm, your body language of various kinds. Are you stiff? Are you relaxed? Are you hyper-agitated? All of that factors into the communication. And children learn this growing up. I remember learning how to say, yes, ma'am, to my mother. And it meant 100 different things depending on how I said it. I said the same 2 words, yes, ma'am. But many times it meant, enthusiastically, yes. Yeah, I'd like to have a piece of cake, yes, ma'am. But sometimes it meant, no way in hell, get out of here.
Or sometimes it meant, just try and make me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And she always knew which way I meant it. But I would hide behind saying, well, but I said yes, ma'am. How can you punish me for that? And so when you use a mediated communication device, you lose that capacity. And you develop a certain level of anonymity. So if I am communicating with you over an iPad screen on the internet and you're 1,000 miles away or you're next door or in the next room, it doesn't matter, I can say something that I might not say if we were face to face. Right. Because I don't have to deal with your misunderstanding or your nonverbal reaction. If you roll your eyes, how many times do you remember being told, don't roll your eyes at me? If they can see them, they can say, wow, you just did that, bam. If they can't see them, then they can't see them.
Right, right.
So that affects the communication.
Right. And the way in which this has been most impactful for me in my professional career is the extent to which a client will come into the office and will say to me, I want to read you some text. And they'll read me a text chain, and they will have concluded that this other person is angry with them or hates them or whatever. And I will say there's nothing in that communication that suggests that. And so people are projecting onto these written communications and an assumption of emotional context that they just can't get, which is what you just said, just in different words. And I'm worried that we do that, first off, so we're projecting. So let me just say very clearly, I cannot assign emotional context to a printed communication. And I'm really good at nonverbal behavior and empathy. Nobody can do that. If you think you can do that, you are mistaken. No one can do that. And then they'll say to me, but look at the emojis. And I'm like, an emoji is not a substitute for nonverbal behavior. And people just don't seem to be able to understand that there's so much of this message that is missing.
But the internet offers opportunities for even more egregious abuse of that reality.
Oh, absolutely.
I may live in your neighborhood. I may see you at the grocery store. I may see you at church on Sunday. I am not going to have a conversation with you ever under any of those circumstances to talk about how much I obsess about sexually abusing a child. Mm-hmm. But I can find a chat room on the internet with everybody else who's found that room that does want to talk about that in brutal specifics. And I can find a group that I can be in touch with, and we can share all of this stuff back and forth that we get off on that I could not ever share with anybody in my community that knows me as a real person, that sees me. It's secretive, it's destructive, it's poisonous. You do the same thing with political agendas. I mean, there's so much out there right now about how divided America is politically, in part because of the news media. Are you extreme left? Are you extreme right?
Yeah.
Are you on these different websites, QAnon, whatever, that promote specific political agendas to an extreme level?
Right.
Or religion. We're about to have an election here in Missouri, and the elections locally, various elections locally for school board members are being impacted by a nationwide movement that's coming from the far right, saying we've got to worry about critical race theory. We have to take certain books out of the curriculum. We've got to take them out of the library. We can't let them, these teachers are going to corrupt and ruin our children if we don't limit them. So we need to put cameras in the classrooms. And if you elect me for the school board locally, then I can watch that on your behalf. And that's what I'll do.
Right.
So candidates are running like that. And they're wanting to take books out of the library and burn books and say, we can't expose our children to these thoughts. We don't want to teach accurate American history. We don't want to teach racial disparity or disharmony. We want to teach reading and writing. We want to teach arithmetic. There's no other thing that should be taught. We don't need these cultural biases and propaganda happening from these school teachers.
But what you pointed out, and I think is very apt, is that the internet can be a way of exacerbating the pathology of an individual.
Yeah, I like the way you said it. My wife calls that confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Yeah, you look for the things that confirm the way you already think.
But I think those are actually two different things. I think confirmation bias is a thing, and the internet is really good at confirmation bias, but I think it also can exacerbate your own pathology, because when you talk about going to, some kind of sub-Reddit and finding a pornography or an abuse kind of forum, I think that
even
exacerbates.
A serial killer chat room,
yeah,
where they all get off on this. This is what I do and how I do it and how I don't get caught.
And that's just really scary to think of. But in a less extreme kind of way, because people say, "Oh, well, you're just being hyperbolic, Brett Newcomb." Yeah. But in a less hyperbolic way, I had a client, and he was just obsessed with feedback from people on the internet, and he would post pictures of himself on these Reddit subforums, and he would just obsess about the responses. And I would say to him all the time, but 90% of these responses are positive. And he's like, yeah, but look at those negative ones. Those are the real ones. Those are the people who are telling it like it is. I said, how do you know that those aren't people who feel horrible about themselves and they get off on just making other people feel bad? I mean, you don't know where this information is coming from. Why would you assume that the minority is the only real part?
It has to do with our personalities. It's something to do with human nature. I remember back in the day giving speeches to 4,000 or 5,000 in an audience, and then they would pass around or ask for speaker evaluation forms.
Right.
So I get 5,000 speaker evaluation forms, and 4,800 of them would just be raving, oh, great speaker, great speech, wonderful job. 150, 200 of them would be like,
Right.
50 of them would be like, the room is cold.
Yeah,
The chair
right,
is hard.
exactly.
I'm hungry. And the other 100 would be like, this guy's a drip.
How do you let him even out?
Those 100 would be the ones
I know.
that I would hear and feel and obsess about.
Well, I'm not saying that I'm immune to that, because I did the same thing, and the most the way that affected me the most was when we would go out and do Protecting God's Children, when we would do workshops on child abuse for the archdiocese, and that exact same thing would happen, where you'd get just 1%, and they would just rip you up. And most of the time, it was probably because those were the people that didn't want to go there and hear the message, right? And
I'm a coach.
Don't kill the messenger.
I'm a good coach.
Yeah,
I love coaching.
Right.
How can you tell me not to pat these kids on the butt?
Right. Or
I'm telling you, if you do, you're
get undressed and take a shower with them. Yeah, absolutely. Which is, that's I heard that more than one, because so people in the audience, if you're saying, "Oh my God, no one ever said that," I guarantee you, I heard exactly that statement more than once.
But it was
what are you saying? I can't shower with these kids?
It was a written document.
Yeah,
they didn't come and stand in front of your face and say it.
Right.
Yeah, which is what we're talking about. And it can stir you up. I mean, it's working you up right now.
Yeah.
And there's not an individual in front of you whose nonverbals you can read, adjust your messaging, interact with, and maybe reach an accommodation where both of you can go, oh, that makes sense to me.
Right. Okay, so that's a good time to take a break, and I will cool down, and we'll pick this up on the other side.
We'll be back. All right.
If you've gotten this far into the show, then obviously you find the show to be worthwhile, beneficial, maybe even helpful. And so I just wanted to say, if you've gotten this far into the show and you want to help us out, even if you don't want to help us out, just do it anyway. Go to Apple Podcasts and rate us and leave a review. That is super helpful. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and hit the bell icon so that you get notifications when new shows drop. That stuff is really, really helpful for us. And I know that Mr. Brett agrees.
Absolutely. Reviews are positive. Positive reviews are more positive, but negative ones are as well, because it helps you decide how to focus and how whatever you're intending to say is being heard.
And the secret is the algorithm doesn't care whether the review's positive or negative.
As our friend Mike Norton says regularly, feedback is a gift.
If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back, and in the Frontiers in Psychology article that I sent you, they are actually now on the verge of creating an entire diagnosis around what we're talking about called internet communication disorder. And I don't know,
with specific subdomains.
Yeah.
So it might be like for pornography, abuse level. The internet communication disorder, we just saw an example of it.
In the Brown-Jackson hearings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're doing this, and they haven't voted yet. We assume that she's going to be confirmed, but Ketanji Brown-Jackson has been nominated for the Supreme Court. And in her hearings, they were talking about, that even one download, or so the sentencing protocols for pornography, child pornography, were dependent on the number of digital images that could be retrieved off your computer. And so what the article that I read was saying is, when they were talking about the time frame they were talking about, you could only download one.
5,000.
Yeah. But now you can press a button and get 500,000 in a single download.
Yeah, just cascade into your computer.
And so is it fair to judge someone off of what was going on, 100 years ago, or not 100 years ago, but
so you're looking at the
10 years
operation
ago.
of the technology, or you're looking at the content of the message.
Right. But the technology has evolved to a point now where it's impossible to not have these kinds of communications. We're all talking about, we're all walking around with essentially supercomputers in our pockets. We all engage in some form of digital communication, and if I text you and you don't answer me back in 10 minutes, I'm wondering, did something happen to you?
Yeah.
And is that healthy? I don't think that's healthy.
No, and I mean, there's so many different sidebars to that. You know, corporations are now focusing on telling their employees, turn the thing off when you go home. We can tell if you check back in. We can tell if you check your emails. We don't want you doing that. We want you to have an evening with your family. But that's new messaging. 20, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, they were saying, we want you ready 24/7. If I call you, you better answer the damn phone. So people are addicted to checking their cell phones at night. They take them to bed. There are sleep problems that are diagnosed because you have blue light in your bedroom, you have the TV on, you have your computer on, you have your phone on, and it impacts your sleeping. So there are so many elements of this that could be focused on. And so, well, let's make an intervention here. Let's make an intervention here. What they're doing with the Jackson hearings is trying to build an argument in support of a social agenda that they have about pornography or about race training, education, CRT. I mean, I saw a meme where they had taken her 3 initials and scratched them out and put CRT next to them for critical race theory. They claim, well, she's on the board of a private elementary school in Washington, D.C., and so she represents critical race theory teaching that the school does on this elementary school level. Well, and the science is critical race is not taught as a theory in elementary schools, in junior high schools, or in high schools. It is taught at the university level for higher level university training, when and where it's taught. But that doesn't pop in the media.
Of course.
So if we're going to do it on the internet, we got to find something that makes it pop, or we got to make it pop.
Right. But, you know, I just am amazed at the growth. I was going to say proliferation, but I think it's more the growth of this phenomenon. You know, one of the things that they talk about in this article is that the more electronic communications that you have, oftentimes the more lonely you feel. So you get driven to engage in a large number of electronic communications because you're lonely, but that doesn't actually satisfy that loneliness.
We have done podcasts in the last 2 years, different ones that focus on research that shows that people are getting pregnant less often, they're having sex less often. Why would that be? Well, the research supports that many of them are laying in bed next to their partner, each individually looking at a communication device showing some level of pornography, but not interacting with each other, not having sex with each other. So the research shows that they lay there and masturbate looking at something on a video screen instead of having sex with their partner.
And that the more that you do that, the more that it desensitizes you, but the more that it desensitizes you to the stimulus input of the porn. So the more, that's how people get into porn crazy addiction. Animal porn and stuff. Yeah, it's because they have to increase the level of stimulation to get you build up a tolerance.
How do you find a crazy animal?
I don't know. You just give them an MMPI and rate their results
and diagnose them. Which is a previous conversation we've had.
But the point is that the more that you expose yourself to these digital formats, the less satisfying that they are. And then the solution is to expose yourself to more of the digital formats. And at the same time, you're losing your ability to really be connected to real human beings. Right. And so this is a tangential thing, but something that I wanted to bring up in all of this. I worked as a clinical director for an EAP, an employee assistance program, for about a decade. And one of the things, and this was a couple of years ago, so I haven't been there for a couple of years, but while I was there, they were working with a company to develop a mental health bot that would be essentially, you would text in and say, I'm feeling lonely, and the bot would talk to you rather than a therapist. And so the pandemic now has exacerbated this because there's a lot of research that's trying to lay the foundation for teletherapy as the wave of the future. Yeah. And I'm telling you right now, if you're a therapist and you think teletherapy is a good idea, you are putting yourself out of a job, because the insurance companies don't want to pay you to do that therapy. They want to produce a bot that will do that therapy, and they want you to be out of the equation.
I've seen some of those programs, and they're things like, I call up and say, I'm feeling depressed. Mm-hmm. And the robot says, say more about that. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me more about that? And you go, well, yeah, I'm depressed because, my...
But listen to the way that you said that. The way that you said that was very warm and very engendering. It made me want to say more to you. But this is what the robot said. Can you say more about that?
No. It doesn't work that way.
Well, I'm talking about if it's text. Now, yes. If they're putting voice synthesized overlays on the text.
Or they have people read it.
But the point is, that's not real therapy. That's not a real human connection.
Right.
We are losing our ability to be genuinely connected and to be able to understand the empathic responsiveness of ourselves. So if empathy is mapped on the left temporal lobe, where your language centers are, as it is, and you are never in the presence of another human being, you don't learn how to be an empathic person.
Can you say more about that?
I can say a lot more about it, because I'm really worried that we are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. So people are very interested in expanding telehealth. And I'm not, if you live in, someplace outside of Bozeman, Montana, and it's 350 miles to a grocery store, and you don't have access to a mental health professional, do I believe that telehealth is better than no health at all? Absolutely. I absolutely do. But that's less than 1% of the total population of the country. Most of us live in an area where we could drive and get actual professional help. And I think that if we start to convince ourselves that we don't need to be in the presence of other human beings, that we're just going to be exacerbating this slide down this spiral. And where does that end up? If we actually educate out of ourselves the ability to read nonverbal human behavior, and we lose our capacity to be empathically responsive to other human beings, where are we going to be? That's a scary place to be.
Yeah.
And I think that people are creating that reality. I know that the insurance companies want that reality, because I've been in rooms where insurance companies have said exactly that, and they're going to deny it. They're going to say, oh no, we just want to deliver good mental health services to the most amount of people.
The insurance company wants to do is make a profit. They don't want to deliver services at all.
Exactly.
They want to deny services. You don't need that. You're not sick. That's not a real sickness, because if I say it is, then I got to
pay for it.
The same. School districts have been taught around the country, tell the teachers not to diagnose. Mm-hmm. Tell the school counselors not to diagnose. Because if they diagnose, if the counselor says to the parent, we think little Johnny is ADHD,
right,
then the school district becomes responsible for paying for the treatment.
Right.
But if the counselor says, wonder if you had him assessed, what they would discover, then they tell you, take him out somewhere. Mm-hmm. Or they say, well, I think he needs some help. He's struggling, and he said some scary things. Mm-hmm. So you need to get him some help. And the parent says, no, we don't believe in that stuff. We'll pray. We'll sit over the dinner table and we'll pray, and that'll be better. And then that afternoon, because they didn't take the kid out of the school and they didn't take him to the hospital after he'd already said, I want to kill people, he goes out and kills people. Mm-hmm. Then the parents get arrested and charged and tried for not doing what they needed to do.
And you're talking about the guy who shot up
in Michigan.
And I, as far as I know, the trial of the parents is still ongoing. Is that correct? They haven't concluded that.
Right, that's correct.
But, the parents were apoplectic when they got arrested. It's not our fault. And everybody said, but the school told you not once, not twice, but 3 times that they had concerns. not only ask, at one point demanded that you take him home, and that was the day that he had a gun in his backpack.
Right.
And I just I'm amazed. When I was young, you, as a parent, you expected that it was your responsibility to raise your children. And I'm not sure that that is the expectation today.
It's such a loaded statement.
It is. It is. Okay. I'm a little fired up right now.
Yeah.
Because this is a topic that really is something that I am concerned about. I'm concerned about it from a professional perspective. I'm also concerned about it from a social psychology perspective. And the reason why I'm so concerned about it is it wasn't like we couldn't see this coming. And yet we don't do anything until we're in crisis. And it's just a shame. Why can't we recognize something might be a problem before it becomes a problem?
So carried to extremes, they are developing these artificial reality games where you wear equipment and you feel like you're in a room with other people.
Yeah.
You can have a conversation, you can see them, you can move, you can read the nonverbals, you can sword fight, you can interact, you can have sex.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all you need is this pair of glasses and earphones, and you go away from where you are. There's a Disney cartoon movie out several years ago. I'm blanking on the name of it, but this robot, the Earth has been destroyed, and this robot's looking around, and it has a personality, and the survivors of Earth are floating around in space somewhere looking for another place to go. Evo.
Yeah.
And it's like cartoons used to be when we were growing up. A lot of social messages in there under the disguise of an entertainment about the internet, about the way we use our time, about the interface with mechanics, mechanical systems. So this kind of stuff is potentially deadly for our culture as well as for individuals. But it's also potentially rewarding and expansive, and we can grow and be places we've never been and be places we'll never go.
And that's fair. And it's not, so you're right. I shouldn't make it all about doom and gloom, because there has been a lot of benefit and a lot of positivity that's come out of our access to electronic media. But it just, I see the writing on the wall.
Touched the nerve.
Yeah. So hopefully that was beneficial for people. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. We are begging you to go to the internets, find us on the YouTubes, Psych with Mike, and subscribe to us there. That would be really helpful. You can go on Apple Podcasts and find us, Psych with Mike, rate us, and leave us a comment. We would really appreciate that as well. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.